Welcome, everyone, to the Illusion of Consensus podcast. I'm really excited here today to have Alex Berenson on the pod. We've been trying for a couple times. We've had some Wi-Fi issues, but we're finally here. Excited to make it happen. Got lots of questions, lots of topics to talk about, some controversial issues, some interpersonal issues, a lot of stuff in the news, Trump, COVID, vaccines, the shift in media, what Alex is up to these days, and some of the conflicts and tensions between other people in the COVID dissident community. Look forward to chatting all about it. Alex, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
All right, so first question, which is of great national and international importance. I think it's a very urgent topic, which is Taylor Swift's new song, So High School, and the incredible lyricism. Truth dare spin bottles, you know how to ball, I know Aristotle, brand new full throttle, touch me while your bros play Grand Theft Auto.
Yes. She's the poetess of our time, Rob. No, listen, I'm never going to say Taylor Swift is not a talented singer. She's got a powerful voice, but it's sort of sad. I actually want, believe it or not, to write a Substack about her and Bruce Springsteen, actually, because, if Bruce Springsteen was sort of like the avatar of a certain kind of male rocker from the 70s through really the 90s, Taylor Swift is kind of, the future is female, right? And Taylor Swift is by far the most powerful, influential pop star in the world today. And all she ever sings about is herself. Springsteen, you can say, well, he became super rich and famous and was pretending that he understood the problems of the working class, but he really was writing about America and, a certain kind of American dream and being other people in his songs. And Taylor Swift is only ever Taylor Swift. And it's sort of sad because she is talented, and it would be nice to see if she can do something other than what's essentially autofiction.
Right, but what else can a pop star do? I mean, pop star love, breakups, sadness, like that's kind of the pop genre.
Again, like Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, even Nirvana. These rock stars. There's no reason she can't write about life in a way that's bigger than she is. Maybe she doesn't want to. Maybe she doesn't need to. But I don't think she's producing anything enduring. I think as rich and famous as she is, she's not going to be viewed as a real poet of America in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So I'll just say, I'm obviously way younger than you are by 100 years. No, I'm just kidding. No, I've grown up on.
I'm leaving.
Taylor Swift.
I'm leaving now.
Yeah. No, I've grown up on Taylor Swift. When I was in grade 6, she had some great songs. When I was in grade 8, she had a new album out, Blank Space, Shake It Off, all these amazing hits. And over the last couple of years, she's had more hits and more albums. Her album Midnights from 2022, I thought was incredible. And I'm a big music nerd, so I'm always listening to new albums, particularly hip hop. I was kind of a big passion of mine, but also pop music. And the music, I will say, I don't know of anyone more consistent in the modern era, at least in the pop genre, that's delivering, putting aside lyrics, which I do find doing sort of deep dives into lyricism and stuff particularly interesting for hip hop and rap. And I have a bunch of rappers that I love to study and see what they're really talking about. But when it comes to her, I just love the way her music sounds. It just gets me up and going. It's just this ecstatic, euphoric feeling. It just feels amazing. It's great if you want to kind of get out of your head and just listen to something fun and just really feels ecstatic and amazing. I really love that part of her. I don't know if you share at least that part, but the music is fucking good.
Like I said, I think she's talented. I mean, she's 35 years old and she's writing about getting fingered by, Travis Kelce. Congratulations. I mean. And by the way, I think actually that's one reason that she's so successful is basically teenage girls still very much are into her because she is very much a teenage girl. She's not grown up in any way, right? So, right. And I guess, look, you can say that the Rolling Stones, for example, there have been incredibly successful rock and roll male bands that didn't write about anything except having a good time. Certainly the hair metal bands of the 80s, that's all they were writing about. But but I do think Taylor Swift's talented, actually, and that's sort of why I would like her to be something more than completely writing about herself and singing about herself all the time. But again, like she's going to make $1 billion this year. So who am I to make any comments about it?
Do you like the way the music sounds though?
Yeah. Or do you? No, she's talented. She's a great voice. She has great producers. She's talented.
Yeah, because again, like music, like lyrics is one part, feeling and just the vibe it gives is another part. So you do enjoy that part. Like, do you think the songs are sticky?
Listen, I will tell you a true story, which I'm like stepping all over the stack I want to write. So a few weeks ago, I was driving into the city with my daughter, who's 11 and a huge Taylor Swift fan, and wants to go to one of the concerts. Like, I don't think we're going to spend $5,000 for you to go to one of the concerts, but like she's literally talking about like I'm going to babysit.
Use a little bit of that Substack money. Come on, just take a little bit of that Substack.
I just don't think it's a good use of proceeds. But she's talking about I want to go for a year, or I want to go. I'll babysit for a year. I'll earn my own money. I really want to go. And I said, look, I understand you like Taylor Swift. I want you to listen to this song by Bruce Springsteen, okay? Which is not an early Springsteen song. It's actually called The Rising. And it's kind of the last really great song that he ever wrote, I think. And The Rising is about 9/11, okay? And it's actually, there's a lot of Christian imagery in it, even though I don't think Springsteen is particularly religious. But it's about a firefighter who like goes down to the World Trade Center and goes in and dies. That's the song. I mean, it's crystal clear what the song is about. And we were driving into the city. I live upstate. Driving in, and we could actually see the Manhattan skyline and the new One World Trade. And I play the song for her, and she starts crying, and I actually start crying too, because these firefighters. It's like. They're like city employees. They sit on their asses doing nothing all day, every day. And then there's a fire and they go like die to try to save people's lives. It's like, that's who they are. Like they're heroes. Like they are truly heroes. And what happened on 9/11, you're young. Like it's easy to forget what happened. And it's easy to forget that 343 firefighters died. Okay. But that song is a work of art. It is. And as long as there are people who remember 9/11 and maybe even in a century or two and nobody does, hopefully people will be able to listen to that song and get some feeling for what that was and what it meant. Okay? Taylor Swift has never done anything like that. I'm not saying she can't.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not saying she's not talented. I'm saying that when all you write about is your love life, like it's fine, and you can produce entertainment, and you can produce art writing about your love life, but you're not ever going to reach something bigger than you.
I see what you're saying. I guess for me now, I just don't have that expectation. When I listen to Taylor Swift, I just want really good music that honestly just makes me feel amazing. And it does that. And not all music does that. Other pop artists don't do that as consistently, or they have, a couple radio hits. So I give her full credit on that front. Is like her last album, Midnights, like out of the 14 songs, 10 were fucking amazing. And I just love them. Again, apart from the lyricism. But I do take what you're saying. I just don't view her in that way. But I do view, like, if I was very interested in Taylor Swift.
I'll say, here's the thing. She certainly views herself that way. Okay? She is not in on the joke. Like, she takes herself very seriously.
Right.
So if she were just, like Olivia Rodrigo or whatever, and being 20 years old, it'd be different. Taylor Swift has a very high opinion of Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift's art.
Yeah.
So you know what? Like, you want to talk a big game, and then produce something that is more.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I think in terms of the pop genre, I mean, a more sophisticated version of Taylor, which is of just different music palettes, different sounds, is like Lana Del Rey. If you listen to much of her stuff, now she has really beautiful lyricism, much more sort of going into deeper lyrical pockets and sort of observing different things about life. But again, that's like, what are you going to the music for? I find her music kind of puts me to sleep. So while it's probably way better written than Taylor Swift and has much more to say. I just like more upbeat music that makes me, want to dance or feel good. So it's like her music, better written, doesn't make me feel the way I want to be felt or the way that I want to experience music. Whereas Taylor Swift, I get much more of that personally.
Right.
I think in terms of the way like the music sounds, I would encourage people like Miley Cyrus had a phenomenal album that came out last year, which showed a lot of maturity. She had the song Flowers and this other song when I was young. It was fucking incredible. It was an amazing music video about how she like regrets so much of the hedonistic youth and all this semi-nude, just crazy all over the place, showing how sexy she is and all this stuff. And now she's really matured into a different person and just has different tastes, and she's outgrown this kind of wild, crazy face. It's like incredible stuff.
So she's growing up and like telling you she's growing up.
Yeah. But before we get into important stuff, I will say on the music front, though, when it comes to lyrics, my favorite artists are probably, I would say, Kendrick Lamar, old Kanye. Definitely Kendrick. Like when I think of like a work of art, I don't know if you have you listened to Kendrick at all? Newer rap.
I know he said this thing with Drake the last few weeks.
Yeah. That I actually don't find that interesting. It's kind of fun, but like whatever. But Kendrick has an album, To Pimp a Butterfly, which is this like he does these narrative albums which have like a beginning, middle, and end. Good Kid, Mad City is a phenomenal album, which he like the album is not just a collection of songs; it's actually like a story that has like a through line in between and like a proper, which is like fascinating that you can even do that. I remember listening to it when I was in high school. I was like, it's like songs, but also songs connected to each other.
Have you ever listened to The Who and Tommy? So that's like, that's a true, it's the same thing. It's a true, like it's a book in a series of stories. It's a true rock opera and like very much worth listening. I mean, this is where I show my age. Like, I'm just not that into it, but I like it.
Okay. I thought you were big into Eminem or something. I saw you tweet about that.
I mean, but Eminem is like, again, he's old. Eminem's 50 at least now. No, he's probably older. Yeah. He's probably in his mid 50s. So
yeah. His daughter's my age. I recently learned that, which I was like, wow.
There you go. So anyway, all right, enough bad music criticism.
I was just gonna ask you, were you into like 90s hip hop? Was that a thing for you?
Yeah, yes. But again, I was more of an alt rock guy, like more of a Nirvana, Everclear, Stone Temple Pilots, all that nonsense.
Gotcha. I recently gone back into Biggie, Notorious B.I.G.,
Tupac. Biggie's great. Tupac, great.
It's really good stuff. Life After Death, Ready to Die.
It's unfortunate that they all killed each other, but no, they're really good.
It's good stuff. All right, that's I think we can retire from our music criticism career. That's, by the way, how I started journalism. If you can't tell, that's so when I started writing freelancing after high school, it was for a few underground music outlets, and then the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's big newspaper. I found this great editor, and so I was doing reviews of Kendrick Lamar and top pop artists and music. Like that's what I thought I was going to do. And so that's like a big.
I'm sure you would be completely blacklisted from that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, definitely. Obviously now we have Substack, where you and I both have a home doing alternative media there. Yes. I do want to talk about alternative media, but let's first talk about Trump because you've been covering it, and I'm curious also like why that's of interest to you. Like I want to talk about like moving on from COVID and finding new topics and stuff like that. But I mean, on the substance first on Trump. So he was given the guilty verdict on all 34 counts. Yes. First felon who's a former or sitting president, and it's essentially for falsifying business records. I'm seeing the discourse on Twitter, and I'd say most people that I follow obviously are condemning this. People, libertarians, center left, to obviously the conservative types. But the only thing I see on the other side from more progressive types like Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks, and Sam Cedar, and these other guys is that he actually did do those things, and he was wrong. Like those things are actually crimes, and so therefore he should be punished for those crimes. So we should now have this new standard and we should be happy that it's being applied finally to crooked people in power like Trump. What's your take?
Well, I think that's absurd. for a crime should have a victim, okay? And it's not clear there was any victim in any of this. I mean, aside from Trump himself, who was essentially the victim of a successful extortion from Stormy Daniels. Now, but if you really want to talk about my sort of libertarian, sometimes I pop up as a libertarian, and I do sort of pop up as a libertarian on certain aspects of extortion law. I don't really think extortion should be a crime unless you're threatening somebody with, let's say, violence at the end of it. In other words, if I come to you, Rob, and I say, you know what, I'm going to tell your wife that, you cheated on her unless you give me money, okay? And it's not actually a crime for me to tell your wife that you cheated on her, then we're just doing a business deal. I have some information that you would rather not come out, and you're willing to pay me to keep that quiet. So, I mean, that's hush money, right? And if I'm smart enough to have a lawyer involved, there probably won't be an extortion charge filed against me. It's only if I'm sort of poor and stupid and I'm the stripper at the club who is not smart enough to get a lawyer and just wants money from you to keep quiet. That's when I get stung with an extortion claim. And Stormy Daniels was smart. She did have a lawyer involved. So she didn't get charged with anything. And again, I think that this is a classic example of where the law shouldn't get involved. Okay. Now, if I come to you and say, I'm going to burn your house down unless you give me money, that's a different crime. Okay. Then if I'm threatening violence or a crime unless you pay me off, then I'm extorting you. Okay. But so we'll start with that. Okay. Stormy Daniels walked to the line of extorting Trump. She wanted money from Trump to stay quiet. Okay. And Trump was willing to give it to her. And that's really a deal between consenting adults and should stop right there. Okay. And Trump might have done that because he thought it was bad for his presidential campaign. He might have done it because it was embarrassing to him personally, or he thought it was bad for the Trump brand, or he thought it was bad for his marriage. There are plenty of possible reasons he could have paid off Stormy Daniels. And we don't really know his intent. There was no evidence of his intent presented. Well, I guess you could say there was evidence that he was concerned about his campaign. But there was no evidence that was his only concern, okay? So that's a problem with the case, okay? Then another problem with the case is that the underlying charge, because paying somebody off for their silence is not a crime, the underlying charge had to do with the falsification of business records. Okay, so think about what that is actually the crime there, what is actually supposed to be the crime there. So let's say I go to a bank, okay, and I own a coffee shop. My coffee shop is losing money, and I need money. And I present the bank with some records that show that the coffee shop actually made $300,000 last year. And they give me a loan, okay? I've committed fraud against that bank. Okay, I've lied to them about how my business is doing so that they'll give me money. That's clearly the intent of what a falsifying business records charge is supposed to be. Or it could be that I'm an employee of that coffee shop and I'm stealing money out of the register and I'm just faking what the receipts are every day. Okay, once again, the crime there is theft. The falsification is in service of the theft. Okay? So none of those examples that I gave you have anything to do with what was charged here, which is essentially that Trump, in an internal business ledger, was classified a payment he made to his lawyer as a payment for legal services, when in reality, it seems to have been a payment made in relation to the payment that lawyer made to Stormy Daniels. So that's another huge problem with the case, okay? Then let's go to one more problem, and there are many other problems besides these problems. Let's go to one more problem, which is, as other people have pointed out, in New York State, falsification of business records is a misdemeanor. It's only a crime that's a felony if, in fact, there's an underlying felony. So again, I give the bank these fake records. What I'm really being prosecuted for is the theft of the fraud on the bank that those records support. So this case, the prosecutors had to come up with some felony crime, and they never really did. They never charged Trump with an underlying felony. They said, well, he committed essentially an unlawful effort to win an election. And I say to you, what? He committed an unlawful effort to win an election as a presidential candidate? Was he supposed to try not to win the election? He was trying to buy somebody's silence, which is legal, okay? And he wanted to win the election. And somehow that becomes a felony under New York state law, even though this is a federal election. And there's never in the United States, a case where prosecutors have tried to charge that, much less make it a predicate crime for a secondary crime that otherwise would be a misdemeanor. Okay, so there's so many problems legally with this case. And that's before you get to the fact that the only person who knows when Trump offered to repay him, assuming that Trump did in fact offer to repay him, is Michael Cohen. And let's agree that all this is true and that this case is not complete junk, which it is. And let's agree that Trump actually did agree to repay Michael Cohen to buy the silence of Stormy Daniels, and that this is an actual crime, which is all nonsense. If Trump did that after the election, as opposed to before the election, he can't have done it to influence the election. In other words, if Michael Cohen did this on his own and Trump then agreed to repay him to keep it all silent after the election was concluded, it can't have been to influence the election. And the only person who knows when that happened, aside from Donald Trump or Alan Weisberg, who didn't testify, would be Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen's a terrible witness. He's an admitted liar. He's a convicted felon. He's committed perjury before. I mean, it's a terrible case, okay? And the fact that the judge didn't essentially throw it out is just, it's a terrible miscarriage of justice. And so look, I think that the other cases against Trump are somewhat stronger. This case was unfortunately the case that went to trial before the election, okay? And the prosecutors actually framed it as Trump wouldn't have won in 2016 if not for this. So what they're basically saying is, you know what, we're prosecuting him for having won in 2016. So you add all this up, I think it's terribly problematic. And I think, this is again a case where the media, they're not lying explicitly. They are covering the trial and covering what is said, but they are essentially lying by omission, by not explaining how incredibly bizarre this case is. And so this reminded me of COVID, okay? In COVID, the media didn't entirely lie, okay? But they never were, until very, very late in the game, did they tell the truth about how the age gradient for deaths really worked, okay? They never said, if you're healthy and under 50, you really aren't going to die from this, okay? Until much too late. And that led to a whole bunch of public policy blunders. And once in a while, if somebody really unlucky died, who was 42 or whatever, they would go out of their way to play that case up to scare people. So in the Trump trial, they're not making things up that the prosecution is saying. They're just not really presenting the insanity of the case in a holistic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I appreciate the explanation. For people who have not been following this super closely, and I haven't been following it super closely, the core allegations are that he falsified business records, and I actually didn't know the second part of what you said, which is that it was done to influence the election.
Yes, so that's what makes it a felony. So let's go back to the beginning. In October 2016, Michael Cohen pays Stormy Daniels $130,000. Okay, he takes out a line of credit from his house, doesn't take money from the Trump organization or Donald Trump. He pays her this money. Okay,
and for people who don't know, Cohen's relation to Trump is
he's Trump's lawyer / fixer.
Yeah.
He works for the Trump organization. And then in 2017, and Stormy Daniels does not talk, okay? Her name actually comes up in a Wall Street Journal story 4 days before the election, but she does not confirm that she had sex with Donald Trump, okay? In 2017, the Trump organization then turns around and pays Michael Cohen $420,000, not $130,000. And they say it's a legal retainer, okay? The felony that Donald Trump was convicted of, the 34 felonies that he was convicted of, are all because he said that was a legal retainer. And in reality, that $420,000 appears to have been paid in 12 installments over to Cohen for, in part, his $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. That's what Trump was actually convicted of. Writing 12 checks to Michael Cohen for $420,000.
Right. And the exact crimes being
the exact
extortion.
Crime is no. The exact crime that Donald Trump was convicted of, the felony crime, is falsification of business records. In other words, the state of New York, or through the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, says those payments in the Trump organization's internal ledgers should have been processed as payment for repayment of hush money, not legal services. That's the actual felony. The reason that's a felony, even though what is called misclassifying business records as the predicate crime is a misdemeanor, is there's an underlying crime, and the underlying crime is that Trump bought Stormy Daniels' silence in an unlawful effort to influence the election.
Right. But you were saying he did that after the election.
The payments were made after the election. Michael Cohen testified that Trump told him to make the payments in late October 2016, before the election, at a point when the election outcome was undetermined. It is possible, and Michael Cohen told other people in 2018 that Michael Cohen did this on his own because he thought he was going to show Trump what a brilliant guy he was and was going to be named Attorney General or some high position in the Trump administration as a result. And then after the election, when Trump won, Trump said to him, you're a loser. I'm not giving you anything. And Michael Cohen said, well, then you better at least repay me for this money that I put out. And Trump said, okay, good, let's do that. Okay. It's possible that's how it happened. But what I'm saying to you is, even if Cohen is telling the truth, this isn't a crime. Okay. It's not a crime to try to win an election. It's not a crime to try to suppress negative information about your campaign by making a legal payment to somebody to keep them quiet. And there have been federal cases on this. Okay, John Edwards, famously, they went after him for this. John Edwards was a senator from North Carolina. I don't believe he is anymore. He ran for president. He had a mistress. He tried to keep her quiet, and the case completely blew up in the prosecutor's faces. Okay, so Trump was not charged federally. The federal investigators and federal prosecutors were all over this in 2018 and 2019, and they decided they couldn't possibly bring a criminal case, in part because Michael Cohen's such a terrible perjurer, and in part because it's just not clear that there's any violation of federal election law here. And then 7 years later, in 2023, the Manhattan District Attorney, who's a Democrat, brings this case against Trump. And although he's independent, it is extremely notable that one of the top prosecutors on this case, the guy who gave the opening statement in the case, is a prosecutor who had been the number 3 guy at the Department of Justice in 2022. You cannot tell me that the Biden administration, if they had not wanted this to happen, they wouldn't have said to him, do not go near this. We think this is a bad idea. There is at least an implicit endorsement by the Biden administration of this prosecution when you have this attorney come in to help.
Right. Yeah.
And again, this is not to say that the other cases, that the other criminal charges around Trump are all equally bad. This, each of them needs to be judged on its own. But this case is a farce. And I think actually the Biden administration is sort of aware of this now too, because you haven't seen Joe Biden come out and try to punish Donald Trump about this. I think the Biden administration has seen that Donald Trump's poll numbers have actually gone up. They've seen that Republicans have been eager to take this on politically. And they've said, you know what, aside from MSNBC, people who actually understand what's going on here, I think this is a real problem. Elon tweeted last night something. He retweeted somebody who had said, look, this is the first criminal prosecution of a U.S. president or former U.S. president. What's it for? It's not for waging an illegal war. It's not for handing over secrets to the Russians. It's not for, taking a bribe from an oil company, $1 billion into some account and you let a pipeline go through. No, it's for trying to win an election that's 7 years old that you actually won. And it's for a charge that would be a misdemeanor. It should be a misdemeanor. I mean, it's insanity. And so Elon retweeted this, or I guess I should say reposted. We don't say tweeted anymore. Reposted this and said something along the lines of, I don't have it in front of me, but, ordinary people, when they see law enforcement politicized this way, it's very, very dangerous to the rule of law and to the United States. And I think that's true. And I think, and I was talking to a Republican I know today about this. It's going to be, let's say Donald Trump wins, okay? And the odds are, according to the betting markets, better than even that he will be our president in 8 months, okay? He's going to have the Department of Justice at his disposal. And he's going to have to be somebody like, Mother Teresa or Gandhi, not to want revenge and not to use the Justice Department in that way, to look at every leading Democratic politician and look for any technical violation they can possibly find. And that's going to be terrible for the country. And I mean, Donald Trump, look, I'm not saying he should do that. He shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is, based on everything we know about him, that's very likely to happen. And it could set off a really bad cycle. And the people who are cheering this today, I mean, they don't have. They're not thinking ahead. They're not thinking about the ramifications of going after the leading opposition presidential candidate on a nonsense case.
Yeah. I think a lot of people see this as a blatantly political prosecution, and I think we need to worry about the precedent that this sets in the future. And I'm most concerned about what you just said, is like when he gets elected, what's going to happen then? What hell is he going to unleash on his opponent leaders? What kind of investigations into Hunter Biden? What can he do? How can he use law enforcement in order to get at his political opponents who did all these things to him in the past? I think that's the biggest concern that we ought to have for this. I mean, practically speaking, there are a lot of questions of like, how is he even going to, I mean, he can win the election, but is he going to be in prison? Like if he gets prison time, he's going to be running
I don't
there.
think he can possibly be in prison if he wins. The Supreme Court will just say, it's going to interfere with his ability to govern the country. And that's, I don't think there would be a serious effort to put him in prison.
Right.
What I do think, and I don't think this is likely.
But at least when he's campaigning, though, what if he's in prison while he's doing his campaign?
It's a nuclear bomb. If the judge at the sentencing hearing in July attempts to imprison him, this will all blow up, before November. I think most people on the left sort of think, oh, he's just going to get probation here. The judge won't actually try to do that. But if the judge says you're getting sent Rikers, for processing or whatever. I don't know if it would be Rikers or if it would be an upstate prison. if that happens, that will be a seismic event. Remember, that's 4 days before the Republican National Convention. So, I mean, I think it's possible if the judge wants to split the baby on this and sort of prove he's a good Democrat. What he could say is, I'm going to sentence you to a year in jail, but I'm not going to. That's not going to take effect until after the election. So you'll be able to campaign. But it is possible that the judge will actually try to imprison Donald Trump in July. He has the right to do that. So, right. But again, just to sort of pull back your original question about unreported truths and my Substack, what am I doing?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that
obviously
next.
Is dying down. I view this is something where I don't have to say Donald Trump is a great guy, and I don't even have to say there's all these people on the right. They say, oh, this is all these cases are partisan, and look at Hunter Biden. I don't want to get into that. I just want to talk about the problems in this case and do it in a fact-based way. And try to explain, and people have written to me and said, I didn't really understand this case until you explained it because it is complicated, and the most of the media is sort of going out of its way to obscure how weak it is. And we can sort of pivot here to, it's sort of the same thing with the NIH and the lab leak stuff, right? Like there are.
Before we get to that, I just want to pinpoint this for a second, which is I remember you had one infamous moment that a lot of people remember, where I think you were on Fox News or somewhere else, where you said you would definitely vote for Biden over Trump, and you think Trump is a serious threat to the country. Where are you at with that now, with these particular allegations? I mean, in theory,
I never said that. That's a misunderstanding. What I said was I couldn't vote for either Biden or Trump. I didn't vote for either of them in 2020 either.
You didn't say I'd vote. I remember reading some Fox News headline.
No, people on the stack and people on the right misunderstand. They say, you idiot, you voted for Biden. No, I didn't vote for Biden. And I didn't vote for Trump either. I left my ballot blank. I actually stayed in Pandemia, in my book about the epidemic. I say, no, I left it blank. What I said, and what I have continued to say, is I cannot vote for Biden. And at this point, I'm suing Joe Biden for violating my First Amendment rights. How can I possibly vote for that guy? But I think Trump, is potentially dangerous, and I don't see how I can vote for him either. I will say I am closer to voting for Donald Trump than I've ever been today. And I'm not saying I'm going to vote for him. I haven't made that decision. That's a very big decision as far as I'm concerned. Listen, I know I'm one person who really cares what I think, but I've been pretty clear that I think Trump's a potentially dangerous guy, and I don't like his personal behavior. I don't like what happened on January 6th. There's a lot of reasons not to like Donald Trump, but I do think all the people on the left can talk about how he violates democratic norms and all this other stuff. What happened to him is a violation of democratic norms. Okay.
Right.
He didn't actually do anything like that. And so we're really in a bad place right now. We're in a place where one guy is saying a lot of stuff that's worrisome. I think, and I don't, again, that's, I do think that the way Donald Trump behaved on January 6th is a real stain on his presidency and on him. But the other guy's actually doing stuff to violate people's First Amendment rights and other rights. And so, and I say that as a guy who believes that the Biden administration violated my rights directly. So I feel like I'm in a tough spot. But when and I want to be clear, I've not yet decided I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. But I feel closer to that than I ever have.
Yeah, I just pulled up the Fox News headline, by the way. So it was Alex Berenson, I'll vote for a Democrat before Trump in 2024. That's what I remembered. You didn't say Biden, you said Democrat.
So at that time, I guess I thought Biden wasn't going to run, which was obviously incorrect. So.
Right. Yeah, and what you just highlighted.
That was also in the context of DeSantis, actually. I thought DeSantis had a good chance. Like a lot of people, especially a lot of sort of COVID dissidents, I really felt he had been heroic during COVID. And I was like, if this guy runs and becomes the Republican nominee, I can proudly support him. Whatever I like and don't like about certain, whatever his social conservatism, I can support him for standing up for our rights during COVID. And then he ran like the worst campaign of a major presidential candidate since, I don't know, Gene McCarthy in 1972 or Dukakis. I mean, he really ran a terrible campaign. And I remember, in last year in 2023, about this time, he was fighting with Disney, and he was threatening to open a prison near Disney World because he'd gotten into this argument with Disney World. And I thought to myself, if you are fighting with Disney and threatening to open a prison near the gates of Disney World, you have lost. And so, let's hope that at some point DeSantis gets it together. But DeSantis is not our choice. Our choices are Biden, Trump, or I guess RFK, but RFK doesn't really have a chance. And so I have to decide, am I going to sit this out again, or am I going to vote for Donald Trump? Because I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden.
Hi, everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual. But it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal mental and physical health and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed generalized kind of medical advice, and less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of a general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word Illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order, where you can get a monthly shipment of Alchemy Elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your Alchemy Elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word Illusion, and you can get your discount, and you won't regret it. All right, back to the show. For COVID, I think Trump was pretty bad in many areas in terms of empowering Fauci and Birx and supporting school closures. Operation Warp Speed, probably the biggest thing. And I think there were reports of him pressuring people at the FDA to approve the vaccine as soon as possible. I mean, those are all horrible things on his legacy.
Well, so I would push back on a couple of things. I think Trump wanted to reopen the country very quickly, and I think the media essentially, and Fauci essentially backed him into a corner. They clearly wanted schools to reopen. In fact, in June 2020,
you're right.
The Department of Education pushed to reopen schools, and they got slapped around by both the teachers' unions, by the media, and by essentially by Fauci and Birx, and they had to give up on that. I mean, I don't know if you remember. You don't have kids. I don't know. You don't have kids at all, right? But you don't have school age kids. There were stories about how teachers were making wills, and some 500-pound teacher in Florida would die, or some retired 90-year-old would die and would get listed as, another teacher has died of COVID. We can't reopen the schools. I mean, it was complete hysteria, and Trump got beaten by that. In terms of the vaccines, so it's interesting. Most people in the media would say that was like his great success was the vaccines. Trump is not a scientist. He doesn't know anything about mRNA. I actually think the idea of trying to, use federal dollars to speed up the process is a good thing. What the problem was that, the normal approval standards got thrown out. So in other words, if at the end of 2020 they had said, we're going to approve this vaccine for everybody over 70 on the basis that those people are really high risk from COVID, and we think that this thing at least works in the short term, and we're going to do more work on it with younger people to really find out its safety and its multiple dose safety. There's a good case to be made that would have made sense. Okay. That's not what they did, right? And once the trial results came out in November 2020, there was just an absolute rush on the left, but on the right too, to get everybody vaccinated so that we could, quote unquote, return to normal. And as I say in Pandemia, the truth is we never had to not be normal, right? I mean, that's the great lie of the vaccine, was that you never needed the vaccine to end this horrendous national nightmare, because the only national nightmare was the one the media made. So that to me, like, to blame Trump is wrong. I mean, I don't know what it would have looked like in 2021 if Trump had been reelected, but the vaccine very rapidly, as soon as Biden became president-elect, he basically took ownership of and control of the mRNA, everything to do with vaccinations.
Right. But again, like I said, Trump did exert pressure on FDA for getting the vaccine approved.
Listen, Trump he's a nakedly political guy. Absolutely. This is why I think he's dangerous. He absolutely wanted the vaccines approved as quickly as possible.
Yeah, just for purely selfish political reasons. So, and with respect to what you were saying earlier, when it comes to Trump exerting pressure on FDA to approve the vaccines as soon as possible, and then also him empowering Fauci and Birx rather than other choosing other people that were more responsible and wise and could have handled the situation much better. That's another valid criticism.
Well, again, I don't think that. I mean, Fauci was the head of NIAID. I mean, he had been accumulating power for 40 years. I mean, Donald Trump, it's going to be very hard for Donald Trump to say no to Tony Fauci early on in an epidemic. I got to turn this back on you for 1 second, Rob. You are an American citizen as well as Canadian?
No, just Canadian.
Oh, because I was going to say, all right, well, let me ask you. You don't have to vote. You don't get to vote in this election. Who would you vote for?
If I was American?
If you're American.
Yeah, in this election. I do see Trump as a threat in many ways. I'm intrigued by what RFK says. I don't know how practical a lot of the things are, but I do like the fact that he wants to reform the food industry, big pharma. He wants to do a number of different things that I think are overall beneficial for our health. Looking at the CDC vaccine schedule and what's needed, what's not needed. Obviously, he has his own views on vaccines. Obviously, he's very anti-censorship. Recently, he's shifted a bit on his view on puberty blockers and the whole trans issue, and I think he's made some good points on that. He is pro-affirmative action, and when it comes to Israel, I don't have any strong opinions on it. I'm just kind of learning about the issue for the first time, really, over the past several months. But it does seem to be strange, the sort of unconditional support for Israel foiling with the lack of support for Ukraine. There seems to be a bit of a lack of principle there, in my opinion. But I'm very intrigued by RFK, and if I had to really choose between the three, maybe I'd go there. But I do share a lot of concerns about Trump, particularly some of the rhetoric when it came to, will you concede the election? And then he was like, oh yeah, if it's a fair election, we'll see.
Right.
Things like that, I do not think are good for our democracy. But Biden's a definite no. Trump, maybe depending on what the messaging is. Obviously, he was very good for the economy, law enforcement. What's happening at the southern border is a big issue. So, if you really care about the southern border, if you care about the trans issues, you care about law enforcement, I could see why you would vote for Trump. On the other hand, RFK has some pretty ambitious ideas for reforming pharma and the food industry.
If I said your choices are, let's not vote for. Let's say RFK, is not on the ballot in your state, or your choices are Biden, Trump, or you can't vote, or you don't vote. Who would you choose?
The short answer is I don't know. But I would be short answer is I'd have to see the exact messaging for this particular campaign and what kind of decisions he's making and what he only has 4 years left, right? That's the other thing. He doesn't have 8 years. So what can you do if you get in with 4 years? Obviously some people on the far left.
He joked he was going to go for a third term.
Yeah. Yeah, some people are concerned, and I get both sides of it. I get both sides of that, by the way. Part of me actually thinks, why is that an 8-year limit? I feel like that job is so fucking difficult. There's so much to do. Maybe it takes 8 to 10 years to get a hang of the whole thing.
No, I can see that. 2 terms is enough. You don't want a king. It's too much power.
What if the people want him, though? Theoretically.
Well, I think Bill Clinton could have won a third term. I think it's possible Obama could have won a third term, actually. I think the idea that 8 years of being the most powerful person in the world, which I think it still is probably enough. But whatever. That's not on the table right now. It's 2024. Your choices are Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or a cast of thousands.
I'm definitely intrigued by Trump. And again, I'm not American, but if, the southern border crisis, that's a real fucking issue. Who's coming in? What's the regulation of that? All the illegal alien crisis in New York and various other Democrat strongholds. So those are all issues that I do care about.
All right. You're like me. It's amazing. After all this time, we should be able to decide, but it doesn't feel like a very good choice. And I do think a lot of Americans feel that way. On the Democratic side, I think they feel, how did they get stuck with this, 800-year-old guy, who will not leave, whose greatest achievement, I don't even know what you would say his greatest achievement is. On the other side, Donald Trump, who, is clearly a very flawed guy personally, and who, has said a lot of terrible, and frightening things. So yeah, we're stuck.
Yeah, I think the key, one of the key differentiators between how I would view this, and I think you would probably agree, versus the media, is he talks a big talk, and he said a lot deeply concerning things, and then you could say somewhat understandably, at least from the start, there's been this panic of is he going to be the next tyrannical leader of the U.S. and do all these crazy things? I think he's a weak person, and he's not actually that organized to actually execute a full tyrannical regime. Yeah. But at the same time, the stuff he has said is concerning.
Certainly he governed as a moderate, I would say a moderate to moderately conservative Republican, right? He didn't govern super hard right. He talked about blowing up NATO. He didn't blow it up. He talked about, not letting anyone from Muslim countries in. That didn't happen, right? So he talks a lot. I think there is a question, a legitimate question. If he wins in 2025, is he gonna? First of all, is he going to be angrier? I would think there's no question he's going to be angrier. And again, we talked about why he'll be angrier, but also, is he going to have people who are really, allied with these more radical, deconstruct the state, build a big border, throw 10 million people out of the country, proposals that he has made, and make those things happen? And ultimately, the Supreme Court is, pretty conservative at this point, and they'll allow all that. Now, look, some of those things, you might say, hey, we need to deport 10 million people. The border's been completely out of control. It's become a sieve. Anyone who wants to be here has gotten here, and that's not okay. But let's be clear, that would be a pretty radical change where they're literally just picking people up and putting them on planes, and you're not coming back. And it doesn't matter if you have a family here or whatever it is, like you are gone. I mean, that would be a pretty big step. So is he going to actually try to do those things? Is he going to try to weaponize the Justice Department? He didn't govern radically in the first term. But is that because he's weak and he couldn't quite get what he wanted, or is it because he talks a big game, but that's not actually what he believes? I don't know. By the way, you and I are both men. We haven't mentioned what is a very important issue, in this election, especially to women, which is abortion. And, after Roe versus Wade got overturned, I wrote a Substack that I'm actually quite proud of in retrospect, saying, look, this was a bad idea to overturn this. Not because abortion isn't terrible. Abortion is terrible. And I think, again, once you have children, you realize, abortion is the taking of a human life. There's no way around it. But you can't stop it. You can't prevent women who want abortions from getting them.
Do you believe that in all stages, like from the very start? Or do you have a certain...
I mean, I think, look, the way the Europeans, whether it's 13 weeks or... I mean, at some point, tough. At some point, like, you got to know you're pregnant. Yeah. And certainly, when the fetus is viable, it's too late. Whether that's 24 or 22... I'm sorry, you cannot do that. That's actually murder, not just the taking of a human life, but murder.
Yeah, and that is rare, just to be clear. Statistically, that is rare. I think we get into the muddy territory of 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 13 weeks. That's where strong opinions on the more Christian, religious side versus the other side of 10 weeks, 5 weeks, that's just a ball of cells.
I mean, honestly, it's the same procedure. It just looks worse, okay? You're doing the same thing. So, once you... Pre-viability versus viability is where the line, to me, if you're drawing a line, needs to be drawn. But it was clear to me that I thought that the Supreme Court had made a mistake, even though Roe versus Wade is bad law. Okay, it was settled. It's been 50 years. You can't do this. And it's also clear that in New York or maybe California, it doesn't really matter. Abortion's going to be legal no matter what. But in southern states and in some Midwestern states, there's real issues about access, okay? And this is, it's troubling to a lot of women. Some men, a lot of women. And honestly, it's actually, I think, an advantage Trump has over other Republican candidates in that nobody thinks he actually cares about abortion, okay? If we woke up tomorrow and it turned out Trump had paid for 6 abortions, in the 1980s, would anybody be surprised? He's a philanderer and he does what he likes, right? And he clearly is not very interested in religion. So I think he's actually more acceptable to women on this particular issue because it's clear he does not actually have any real heartfelt beliefs about it. But it is a tough issue for Republicans. And you can see actually that they are backing off, that they do not want, to get crucified. And they know that if they start talking about, criminalizing it from day one or banning abortion pills or really forcing women to carry unwanted pregnancies, much less rape and incest, I mean, the really hard cases, there's no appetite for this in the United States. The United States is far more politically moderate and culturally moderate than people on the left admit.
All right, so I want to talk about the FOIA documents. I want to talk about just kind of your shifts in what you're writing about, and then lastly, we got to hit a couple of the listener questions, which all surrounded some of the controversies around your communications with various people in the dissident community. Which I think we have to talk about.
Time before we get to that, Ralph.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, FOIA documents. Let's quickly go over that. So you wrote a great piece on this. I was reading today on this Dr. David Morin's character, top advisor to Fauci, and just the bizarre, insane things that he said in these emails you highlighted in the piece, where he's saying stuff like, you may have noticed that I intentionally forwarded you these news clips sent from my government email, and that's okay as long as you don't reply to that email. I've done this because this should not show up in a FOIA FOIA and is innocuous as it's just forwarding a third-party item already in the public domain. But one of my first questions is, does he not know that this could be, like, people could request to see this? Like, how is he?
They can't. No, he didn't turn that over. That appears to have come out of Boston University. So BU has servers, and they have their own records retention policy. And one of the people he was emailing had to turn that over. So this is the problem from the point of view of email, is there's always somebody on the other side, and that person, may not delete stuff, or his, institution may not delete stuff. No, I tweeted about this, and I have to come back to this again on a stack. I do feel like I've not run out of stuff to write about on unreported truths. Even though COVID is winding down, even though there's less new research on the vaccines, there's and very few people take them these days. There's still so much to write about. But one of the things, I think I tweeted this, or I posted this on X. Look, when I was at the New York Times, and I was at the New York Times for 10 years that they would like to pretend never happened. And I was, I covered a lot of white collar crime, and I wrote articles that got executives sent to prison. That's not an exaggeration. I can point you to the specific ones.
Wow.
It is rare to see documents like this. Okay. Normally somebody would say, "Oh, my government email's not working. Can we switch over to Gmail today?" Like there's some some excuse. It's however flimsy. It's your birthday. I want to email you, a birthday greeting that's off Gmail. This is literally like, I'm going to break the law now. I'm going to refuse to comply with these FOIA regulations, which are not merely regulations, they are laws. And I'm going to tell you about it, and we're going to put it in writing. And I'm going to do it 15 times. I'm going to do it over a period of a year. And this is the kind of thing that, as complicated as the Trump case is, this is the opposite. And by the way, prosecutors love this, and they love it particularly with white collar crime, because oftentimes the underlying crime is complicated, right? It's, Enron's a classic example. So incredibly complicated accounting rules that Enron executives were pushing the limits of, and recognizing profits that they hadn't actually made yet. And was that okay? Well, this accountant says it's okay. We can do it, blah, blah, blah. Okay. What's easy? Lies. Lying to federal investigators. Putting in writing that you're not going to follow federal records laws. Those are easy cases to prosecute, because any juror can understand that that's a no-no, okay? And when you're dumb enough to put it in writing and say, I know what the law is and I'm not going to follow it, and then you go testify before Congress so badly that a Democrat tells you, shut up, basically, you're impugning yourself. I mean, this guy, what comes also across, there's a couple other things beyond this like procedural stuff. The substance of the emails is interesting too, because what comes off is incredible arrogance. First of all, incredible sort of, for lack of a better word, deep state arrogance about the Republican Party, and absolute unwillingness to consider that maybe, hey, you know what? Maybe this did come out of a lab. Maybe we should consider that possibility instead of just ignoring it. But also, and this is something else that I didn't get into in any of the stacks yet, the way Moritz talks about dealing with Fauci. Now, Fauci is a hero of Moritz's, right? He's reported to Fauci for a long time. And, he's not number 2 in the department. He's, quote unquote, the senior scientific advisor. So he's kind of like the losery guy they bring in when Fauci needs something like technical explained to him. Moritz helps with that, okay? So, but what you see is that Moritz views Fauci as this egomaniacal creature who needs to be handled with kid gloves, who will, if you suggest he does something, if Moritz says, if I told Tony to do it, he would not do it simply because I suggested it. So you have to sort of lead him to the idea and make him think it's his idea. And then in a different email, I think it's Morns, and maybe somebody else says, well, I don't have a Nobel Prize, and I'm not like, a senior scientist at Harvard, so he's not going to listen to me. Like, the only people who are worthy of Tony Fauci's attention have to have, a Nobel laureate at the end of their name. And I mean, it's really an incredible picture of a guy who is, almost unmanageable because of his ego, or is unmanageable because of his ego, and who, for all the shucking and jiving, and I'm just Tony, and and going on with Kim Kardashian or Steph Curry, is absolutely in love with himself. I have these tweets, these X posts that I call bulletins from Dr. Anthony S. Fauci,
right.
and they're written in this incredibly vulgar, where's my effing Nobel prize, and I often end them by referring to hey peasants, where's my prize. And it turns out that like this really is how Tony Fauci sees the world. He's science. If you have a Nobel Prize, you might also be science. Otherwise, you are a peasant. And it's just a damning portrait. And I think they really haven't gotten to Fauci's Gmail account. They haven't gotten to his communications. But it's not going to look very good for him, I think, when it comes out. And then we get to the true substance, which is A, what did they know or suspect about the origins of SARS-CoV-2 and when? And B, what did they talk to the Chinese about, if they talked to the Chinese about anything? And, are we ever actually going to get that smoking gun that shows this came out of a lab, or shows, maybe not with 100% certainty, but essentially that we knew by, let's say, late 2020 that this came out of a lab. And so, or maybe even earlier. I don't know. But what I know is that the documents are terrible that the House committee has presented, and that they're so bad that the Democrats on the committee actually were excoriating Morins and excoriating Peter Daszak. And it's going to be very interesting next week, because Tony speaks, I believe, on Monday, whether the Democrats protect him and whether there's more documents that come out as part of that hearing. And one last thing, Fauci does still have some defenders. And of course, those are all the people who've been, in the Angela Rasmussens, the Christian Andersons, the people who've been defending him and saying a lab leak's impossible from day one. But he also has defenders in the media. It is absolutely amazing. And I said this on Clay and Buck earlier this week. And again, I'm repeating myself on broken record. I got to write a stack about this. The Democrats in the House are ahead of the media. They are being more honest about how problematic these documents are than the media is.
Yeah. I'm just going to highlight one passage here quickly, which you put in your piece. Today, to my total surprise, my boss, Tony, actually asked me to speak to the National Geographic on the record about origins. I interpret this to mean that our government is lightening up, but that Tony doesn't want his fingerprints on origin stories.
I mean, what are you going to say about that? Like, he's an incredibly political operator. He was at the top of the federal bureaucracy for 40 years. He is not dumb, and he knows how to play the game.
Yeah. Do you think this David Morins guy is going to face prison time potentially, or some kind of?
I think in a normal world, listen. I don't know what the Biden DOJ is doing or not doing, and as we've seen with Andy Slavitt, who is a figure of particular interest of mine because he led the White House censorship efforts against me. He refused to testify before Congress, refused to turn over documents they were asking for, and the Biden administration said we're not going to prosecute him for contempt of Congress, which to me is sort of nakedly political. When you have somebody like Peter Navarro, who has been, actually, I don't know if he's in jail yet, but, sentenced to a prison term for contempt of Congress for refusing to testify. To me, Slavitt is exactly the same thing. So clearly the Biden DOJ is playing favorites here. Now, whether they can ignore this, which isn't just a refusal to testify, but really bad documents, I don't know. But if it's just hard for me to believe that a federal prosecutor can't do something with this. Now, the question then becomes, is Morin's willing to flip on Fauci if he has anything, right? So, he's talking in that passage that you just read, in that email that you just read, about handing documents to Tony Fauci. Does he know, what he gave Fauci? Does he know that he gave Fauci stuff and they then agreed to delete it? I don't know. That would be, in the normal course of events, very important. That's what you do. You go up the chain as a prosecutor. Is the Biden administration going to allow that to happen? I do not know.
Yeah, I have a sense, just intuition, I might be wrong, that there is a smoking gun there. I feel like within these emails, I'm tracking a bit of a pattern, which I feel like there's something there that if we can even come across it, that's a big question, if we can even actually uncover these documents further and see what other emails were there, like that would be an international story.
You would think if there's something saying like, you know what, I talked to NSA today and they're pretty concerned that this came out of the lab, and I told them, we can't have that. I mean, look, it's not going to be that obvious, whatever it is, but that's sort of the dumb, screenplay version of it. But there's stuff you don't know what it is until you get it. That's why in civil suits this process is called discovery, because you do discover stuff. Yeah.
Okay, two things before hopefully we can have time for the couple of the reader questions. Two things: the New York Times piece on vaccine injuries. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I looked at that carefully, and there was some good stuff in there from Apurva. At the same time, it's had the same propaganda, like the same talking points about the risks, like the benefits outweigh the risk, and it still made sense for most people, and blah, blah, blah. It's a very rare phenomenon. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, and then I want to spend another quick minute on just kind of where you're going forward with unreported truths and what kind of topics you're interested in outside of that.
It was completely half-baked, that piece. And, to my mind, it focused on exactly the wrong points, right? It focused on these sort of soft injuries for the most part. When, what do we know? We know the vaccines cause cardiac problems in some people, or did cause cardiac problems in some people. By the way, when was the last time you heard about a fit professional athlete collapsing, right? Not that recently. And guess what? Those folks have not gotten any more shots in the last 18 months or so. So, clearly there were some cardiac events, and I'm not saying there were millions of them, but there were some serious cardiac events following vaccination.
And I've heard of some recently as well, by the way, in the last several months, 4 months. I've heard of a couple of cases that were very troubling to me. They're brought to my attention, and it wasn't clear what other causes there might have been. But
so that's, that's a real issue. The autoimmune issues are real. They're clearly real in some people. Whether that's causing reactivation of something like herpes or shingles, or other kind of unusual, there were some type 1 diabetes cases, very rare, but it did happen in adults following vaccination. That's an autoimmune problem. Okay. It just is. And again, not saying that these are common, but these were real and very serious. And so what's she focusing on? People who have these sort of random neurological, very hard to, brain fog is just very hard to measure. Okay. Whether it's from COVID, or whether it's from a mRNA vaccine, or whether it's from, having a 6-year-old kid who doesn't let you sleep. Okay. There's a lot of stuff out there that is going to be very hard to link to a particular cause. And of course, Apurva being Apurva, that's what she focused on. Okay. And by the way, and let's talk about one other issue, which is cancer. And there isn't a lot of evidence that the vaccines cause cancer. Okay. And I know that may be a controversial issue for some people in the sort of anti-vaccine or anti-mRNA community, but there's just not. Okay. But not a lot is not the same as no evidence. And certainly on specific cancers, in some cases, there's better evidence. And, it's the cancers that you would expect. it's B cell cancers, it's T cell lymphoma. There's some specific case reports, and there's some data out of Japan now that's concerning. I'm not saying it's proving anything, but it's concerning. But of course, she's not going to touch that. So what does she do? She writes sort of a lame story where she can feel good that, she's looked at the vaccine injury connection and she's put it in context. And so, and that'll be it. The Times will not write about this again. So it's frustrating to me. And frankly, it's frustrating to me that on the anti-mRNA side, these crazy numbers get thrown around like the vaccines have killed 17 million people. That's just completely fictitious. Okay. I don't know how many people the mRNAs have killed. Okay. I'm not going to even try to guess. It's not none.
Yeah.
It's not 17 million. It's closer to none than 17 million, but it's not none. Here's what I know about the mRNAs. They didn't work for very long. And when you compare them to other vaccines that are much simpler and that we understand much better, it's not clear that they're any better or were any better at preventing serious disease and death during the period when they did, which I'm not sure they do anymore. This is a very complicated question epidemiologically. And we have no idea, because we didn't properly test, what it looks like for their long-term safety when you give people 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 doses, which was never contemplated. Okay? They are a failed product, and that's why almost nobody's taking them anymore. And I'm not saying, again, that they killed 17 million people or that they didn't work at all in 2021. What I'm saying is they didn't work as promised, and they have failed.
Yeah. The 17 million thing, you might have heard, I hosted a debate between Tracy Beth Hogue and Denis Rancourt, who authored that paper, and I was not convinced that the 17 million. Sorry, let me just repeat that.
Yes.
You mentioned the 17 million figure. I hosted a debate on that on the pod between Tracy Beth Hogue and Denis Rancourt, and I was open to whatever, but I was not convinced by the end of it that the claims or the evidence used in the 17 million paper to extrapolate and make the claim for 17 million was strong or cogent. I thought it had a lot of issues that the paper that's being used, but that's people, like some people want to hear that. Some people, they hear other people promote those numbers and then they get a lot of traction and people think that number is accurate. And then we just end up in just this sad tangent away from like the real issue. Like we need to talk about vaccine injuries and how to treat it. And I've had some interesting conversations with this one guy, Dr. Adil Khan, who does this interesting regenerative medicine stuff. And he's clinically seen a lot of benefit for individuals doing these interesting stem cell therapies to reboot the immune system. There's not any solid randomized controlled evidence on it, but he's seen incredible clinical experience and he's willing to provide the data to me to look at it further, because the data is incredibly compelling for people with myocarditis and autoimmune issues. These novel stem cell treatments, which are very, very safe as far as I can tell, are helping a lot of people. I feel like that's a big part of the conversation that I think people need to talk about, is people that are still suffering from vaccine injuries. Like, I'll just say this quickly, that I did follow up with this one guy who I interviewed in 2021, this local law enforcement officer who had gotten myocarditis after the vaccine. I followed up with him a couple months ago. And I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm assuming things are great. And he's like, yeah, things were great until December when I had to go back to the hospital again because I had some severe cardiac episode and the doctors don't know what the hell to do with me. And they're considering doing the surgery. I forget the exact name, but some cardiac implant that detects
an ablation or something like that. He probably has some kind of issues with the electrical conduction of
it. So the myocarditis was supposed to be temporary and it's supposed to go away. He's still struggling now, and now he can't work out again, and he's fucking confused. Like, what the hell, man? This thing that I got 2 years ago, I'm still struggling with these acute cardiac symptoms, and doctors don't know what the fuck to do with me. Like, that's a serious problem.
Yeah. No, listen, heart tissue doesn't regenerate, and if you had a serious case of myocarditis, that's not a joke. So, again, as for the stem cell or any of that, I haven't looked at any of that, and despite what people on the left sometimes say about me, I don't talk about stuff that I don't know and haven't researched. And that's another reason, by the way, I don't talk about traditional vaccines and autism. I as far as I can tell, older vaccines are pretty safe, like in general. And the evidence that they cause any real problems on a population level basis is not very good. But I haven't looked. Okay, that's just sort of my basic instinct, and having read a couple of papers on it. But so I just stay out of that because to me the mRNAs are a different product, and I have done a lot of work on them, and that's what I want to focus my attention on. And so I know that frustrates my readers sometimes, and they tell me you got to do this research, and I say it's just a rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
I think that's really important what you're saying about being honest about what you know and what you don't know. That's something that I've had to make a very conscious point of like this pressure that I felt like, and obviously it's incentivized to give the hot takes on all the issues. You got to be expert on vaccines, expert on Israel-Palestine, expert on Ukraine, national security and southern border and the trans issue and this, and like you got to weigh in on everything. And I've made a very specific point of like, I only weigh in on things when I absolutely know what the fuck I'm talking about. Otherwise, I just don't weigh into it. Right. So for me, a big topic is like psychedelic therapy. I'm very interested in that. And I've looked into it. I've had a bit of clinical experience with it. I know it helps a lot of fucking people who are trapped in depression, PTSD, just fucking debilitating anxiety, some of those things that I've experienced. And I know the efficacy and safety of some of those things. And there's going to be this FDA meeting next week on Tuesday for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, which I think is incredibly promising and helps a lot of people, particularly for PTSD and depression. So like that's like a very niche issue that I've been weighing in on and talking about and writing about because I think it's going to help a lot of fucking people. And I've done the research to know that there's good evidence behind those things. Whereas other things, like vaccines and autism, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, other than like free speech issues surrounding some of those topics, like I'm going to have Ben Shapiro on soon and I'm going to press him on some of those things and ask him because there's been some of the concerns around that issue. But I don't weigh in on things outside of what I really know. Right. Now, are you like when it comes to like vaccines and autism, if theoretically, if someone were to convince you or to give you the data, you being an honest person, just hypothetically, would you be willing to concede that if you got the evidence?
I mean, if somebody, gave me, part of the problem is that like this stuff is not being studied in randomized controlled trials at this point. So it's really dirty epidemiological data. There's a bigger issue for me. When I hear you talk about PTSD and depression, and autism to some extent, like why these are autism diagnoses have soared in the United States in the last 50 years, okay? But MR, mental retardation diagnoses have plunged, okay? So is it possible that a lot of kids who 50 years ago would have been diagnosed as MR are now being diagnosed as autism because it's a happier diagnosis for parents to hear? I don't know, okay? PTSD, you say PTSD, and I think to myself, how can PTSD be a problem for your generation? Okay, nobody went to Vietnam. No, I mean, like it's the happiest, or it's the most coddled,
I don't think that's an issue for my generation.
Parented generation in the world. Where's the trauma? Okay, so a lot of times, and people won't say this, like like. My feeling is sort of spare me. Like you're all so soft, okay? And I don't know about the psychedelics. I have not looked at the data, but I know about cannabis. And cannabis as a mental health drug is a terrible idea, okay? It gets you high. If I gave you cocaine, Rav, for 2 weeks, it would be a great 2-week antidepressant. It wouldn't be so good for a year, all right?
Yeah.
Drugs that produce euphoria, and that's why people use drugs for the most part, are good short-term antidepressants. It's just when you try to stop using them, it's not so easy. So I'm incredibly suspicious of psychedelics as a treatment for anything. If you want to, if you're a healthy person who wants to get high and knows there's a risk, and you want to go out and to a rave and drop, ecstasy, or sit at home with your 3 friends and drop acid and watch the walls move. Okay, but don't tell me it's medicine. All right, I have the medical patient / medical industrial complex in the United States is incredibly powerful. And guess what? People are not healthier than they were 30 years ago when it was less powerful. We are dying younger. I know this is unpopular with everybody, but I'm just the Grinch about this.
Yeah, I think you're saying something else that's sort of outside of what I was talking about. And I don't know if I was cutting out earlier, but just to be clear, I was not at all implying that my generation's suffering from PTSD. I don't know what if you thought I was implying that. That's not what I was implying at all. But yeah, I mean, we can talk about psychedelics for hours. That's not the topic of this podcast. But I will say on that.
But again, I want to admit something. Okay, yeah. I have not looked at the data, so I don't actually know. It is just based on my experience around the legalization of cannabis. Yeah.
Yeah, and I share your concerns about cannabis. Just to close the loop on the psychedelics thing, it's what it essentially is you have these sessions, which I've done particularly like with MDMA or psilocybin, where it's like 8, 9, 10 hours. And in that session, it's not fucking fun. I mean, it's kind of fun in a way. It's not like, it's incredibly healing and it's incredibly clarifying. And it's like unpacking all these different issues that you've been storing onto, that childhood bully, that breakup from 5 years ago, this toxic relationship with a parent. And it's like realizing that, that's actually been informing what I do. And I won't go into all this now, but like I had a session on January 31st, and at some point I will write about it. But it was all about how like my career, like my journalism career, has been motivated by a lot of it's been motivated by, growing up, I was bullied quite a bit, and some of the motivations has been, I don't like to admit it, but for people to like me and to accept me finally for who I am. Right. And like that was something I was not willing to confront for a long time. With the MDMA session, it's just incredibly clarifying. You can do this in talk therapy. And a big part of these protocols are not just you get high for 8 hours, but it's like preparation before with intention, working with a therapist. You have the session for 8 hours, and then it's months of integration afterwards on working on those particular things. And
you're doing drugs and you're not even having a good time.
Anyway,
listen, that does sound interesting and serious.
It's very powerful, man. I would not. Yeah, I would not dismiss it.
So you're a good interviewer, man. You got me to stay much longer than I intended, but I gotta go. So
okay,
I appreciate this.
And
at some point I gotta come back, or maybe if I ever actually do a podcast, I want to interview you. But at the very least, I want to read this piece. You got to write this thing about. This January 31st session, because I want to read that.
I wrote one on a session I did a couple years ago. It was my first time doing it, and weirdly Megan Kelly ended up mentioning it on her show, and she did a pod. It was pretty interesting, but I can send you that one. So that was all about like when recognizing the impact that our parents have, and I know kind of what you said. Like I actually disagree a lot with some of what Abigail Shrier says. I think it's much more complicated, and I think recognizing the kind of the spectrum of trauma and realizing certain things that impact us. And like I've had to unpack a lot of that, of like what I thought was normal was actually very toxic and harmful. Things with parents and friends, things that I grew up with, where it's like, oh yeah, it's okay to have this crazy, chaotic environment where you're yelling at each other and then just brush it off. And like, yeah, you want to be resilient. You don't want to just be talking about your feelings all day. Like I get that, but it's like doing some of the work that I've been doing in my personal life with psychedelic therapy and all the integration. It's like unpacking like, if I don't actually look at those things and unpack them, they're going to keep on informing me and informing my relationships and lead me to certain, ways of approaching people that make other people push away, or things in my career, etc. So I feel like this is going to be a topic for people listening in my career that I'm going to explore more and more, is the mental health stuff and really rethinking how we look at these things. So that's
all right. Well, I look forward to that. This has been great, man.
Thanks for coming on. I know there were a couple. I know there were a couple of very important reader questions, but I mean, if you have to go, that I totally understand. But
I do next time.
Okay. There was Pierre Corey was writing in.
I appreciate this, and let's, like I said,
we'll do it next time.
Stay in touch, no doubt.
Yeah. FYI though. FYI, there were some comments from Pierre Corey. He had some questions. Brett Weinstein's had concerns. So there's some stuff to get into.
All
and
right.
Wait, actually, to end on that,
I promise. And if Brett ever is not afraid to debate me directly, we can do it.
Yeah.
Or discuss.
Okay. I was going to bring that up. He's not afraid to debate. He was actually sick, and I think he didn't appreciate when you implied on Twitter that maybe he backed out. He was ready to debate, but he got COVID, or some other virus.
That was a year ago. So unless he still has COVID, anyway.
Yeah. All right.
If we can do it with you as the moderator, we can do it with Joe Rogan as the moderator anytime.
And someone like Pierre Corey, Robert Malone, any of those people, if they want to have discussion.
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Why not?
That's great. Maybe that's better. Maybe that's better than us talking about it. Then I'll float it by Pierre. We'll see if we can do something. Anyway, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate your work.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many. Inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.